This is with regard to the construction of the Keystone Pipeline.
It was day 4 in the Oval Office for Donald J. Trump, and the America First president was about to make a foreign company very happy and richer. None other than the TransCanada Corporation of Calgary, Alberta.
Okay, Keystone Pipeline.
Sometimes you think this stuff only happens in the movies, right? That you have this big corporation coming in and trying to kind of take over the little guy. They came in and acted like bullies, and we've beat them, you know, this little team of folks has beat them so far. The question is, will we be able to beat them in the end?
On this edition of The Fifth Estate, Bob McKeown investigates the hidden role of money and power in the battle over the Canadian pipeline called Keystone XL.
The name says it all. TransCanada, a Canadian institution, and its Keystone XL pipeline is planned to carry Canadian oil south through 2 provinces and several American states to refineries on the Gulf of Mexico, then for sale in the U.S. or abroad. With U.S. approval, it could be an economic boon for Canada. But that is easier said than done. The fight over Keystone now has gone on for almost a decade. Recently, the Fifth Estate took a road trip along the Keystone XL route to better understand that fight. As you'll see, what a long, sometimes strange, often very un-Canadian trip it's been. And it all began at the epicenter of the Keystone battle, the state of Nebraska, when TransCanada set out to convince Nebraskans to sign over their land for the pipeline's right-of-way.
They came to my door about 9 years ago, and it was a Baptist minister was their land agent, and oh man, he was smooth. He was, oh, you Nebraskans, you're salt of the earth.
Rick Hammond's family had been rooted in the land here for generations when the Canadians came calling.
And what were they asking when they came to your door?
Well, it wasn't an ask. It was a telling me that they wanted to put a 36-inch tar sands, they said oil, but a tar sands pipeline through a section of our ground 15 miles away. And I listened politely, let him into my house.
He says TransCanada's land agent made him an offer. Take it or leave it. Rick Hammond chose the latter. But it's not just the prospect of a Canadian company taking his land. What also worries Hammond is the environmental threat the pipeline could pose. And with reason.
This pipeline will leak. All pipelines leak.
He might have this in mind. 2010, an Enbridge pipeline bursts open, spilling heavy oil from Canada into Michigan's Kalamazoo River, one of the largest inland spills in U.S. history. 2016, a pipeline belonging to another Canadian company, Husky Oil, spills 200,000 liters of Athabasca crude into the North Saskatchewan River. Now, if TransCanada is successful, it would dig a trench for kilometers across farmer-rancher Rick Hammond's property. A Keystone XL spill could contaminate the water supply for both his farm and family.
Why would we risk our lifeblood of water for farming, which is the lifeblood of Nebraska, for a foreign oil company to export oil?
Indeed, TransCanada pipelines may well have misread the political climate in Nebraska, believing it could get approval for a controversial route through some of the most important and revered land in the state.
Here in Nebraska, they call these the sand hills, the rolling dunes that cover about a quarter of the state. But what you can't see is what's underneath, a vast natural reservoir that supplies water to about a third of the continental United States, and that creates the largest watershed ecosystem in the entire country. But despite that, it's through these sand hills that TransCanada chose to build the Keystone XL pipeline.
But the company saw it differently. Dennis McConaughey was TransCanada's executive vice president when the Sand Hills route was planned.
From a technocratic perspective, going through the Sand Hills made sense because it wasn't like fundamentally more risky. And
Not more risky, McConaughey insists, because conventional wisdom is that the safest pipelines are the shortest ones.
And the shortest linear distance through Nebraska was going through the Sandhills.
But it's clear that TransCanada underestimated the passions triggered by a possible threat to the Sandhills and the opinions of Nebraskans about the pipeline company and Keystone kept getting louder.
What's going on when we look at a foreign company and say it's okay to come in here and take Nebraska land, take it out of our hands that we have worked generations for?
It was early 2010. My husband's a cattle rancher, and so I started getting phone calls from other ranchers asking me if I had heard about this pipeline.
Jane Klebb was a Florida Democrat who'd married into a ranch family in the staunchly Republican state of Nebraska. For her, the debate about Keystone was uncharted territory. At first,
I knew about farmers and ranchers, and I knew about Nebraska politics, but I definitely knew nothing about pipelines.
But that was then.
Hello, commissioners. My name is Jane Klebb, and I head up a group called Nebraska.
In the years since, Jane Klebb has brought together farmers, ranchers, Indigenous communities, and environmentalists to form a grassroots group dedicated to stopping TransCanada and Keystone.
We just don't trust TransCanada at all. They never lie to you, but they also don't tell you the truth. So I feel like whenever we're with them, we're talking to like a used car salesman.
It's the same way Nebraska rancher Rick Hammond feels, since he refused the take-it-or-leave-it ultimatum of TransCanada's agent.
He kept coming back and kept calling and kept coming back, and then finally it got uglier and uglier, and then they threatened me twice with eminent domain on the phone and then once in writing.
The principle of eminent domain gives state governments the right to expropriate private property for the public good. But Hammond wonders what that's got to do with Nebraska, or him.
This product is not for us. It's going to the Gulf to be put on the world market for the highest price. So why can a foreign company for profit claim eminent domain?
The answer to that may be found at the State House in the capital of Lincoln. It's here that Nebraska politicians come together with a crucial component of the battle over Keystone, TransCanada's money. The company has so far spent years and literally billions trying to win American support for its pipeline.
We put out a chart showing who spent the most each year. And for any number of years there, they were the leading spenders in terms of lobbying.
Jack Gould follows the money in Nebraska politics for the citizen watchdog group called Common Cause. During a single legislative session, here's what other special interest groups in the state spent. Now, here's what TransCanada spent lobbying lawmakers on Keystone.
And where does that stand in the general context in Nebraska?
That's the largest I've ever seen.
And then there was TransCanada's outreach program to Indigenous communities along the pipeline route.
TransCanada was fully behind an aggressive, robust tribal engagement approach.
Lou Thompson headed TransCanada's Tribal Relations Unit. When he says tribal engagement, what he means is getting support for Keystone by giving the tribes money for one thing or another. A lot of it.
If you look at what the company put towards its employees and our program, it's certainly in the millions of dollars that we've contributed, or the company contributed. Yeah.
I've probably seen as much of the Ogallala of anybody.
On top of that was the Keystone advertising campaign, one of the biggest in the state.
People recognize the science of the situation. I think that should allay a lot of the fears.
But TransCanada miscalculated on one ad in particular.
Saturday night in Lincoln, Nebraska legend
On football game days, the University of Nebraska Stadium could qualify as third largest city in the state, filled to capacity with 90,000 fans. One Saturday in 2011, this appeared on the giant Husker Vision TV screen.
Husker Pipeline is presented by TransCanada.
It's a TransCanada commercial featuring Nebraska's pride and joy, the football team's offensive line, locally known as the Pipeline.
The 1995 Husker Pipeline raised the
In a state devoted to faith, farming, and football, and not necessarily in that order, comparing a Canadian pipeline to an American football institution was seen as sacrilege. Rancher Rick Hammond.
And their analogy was, our pipe is as strong as your Nebraska football, or make it that strong. And it was like, I saw that, it's like, I was just instantly mad. Nebraska football is, that's one of the few things that we're known for other than corn and cattle.
Hammond wasn't alone. Soon, the University of Nebraska dropped that commercial and canceled its sponsorship deal with TransCanada. But there were others only too happy to keep taking TransCanada's money.
I have been accused of being in the pocket of TransCanada. I think I've received the least good out of this financially of anyone that I've known.
Nebraska Senator Jim Smith is proud to be labeled one of the Pipeline Six, the hardcore Keystone supporters in the legislature. Some recipients of campaign contributions from TransCanada. Indeed, it was Senator Smith who pushed through a company-backed law that effectively allowed TransCanada to get Nebraska approval for Keystone with little or no public scrutiny, according to anti-pipeline advocate Jane Klebb.
There were no standards, there were no requirements for public hearings, and there was no appeal process.
Smith insists both the end and the means have been for the public good.
Is it fair to characterize that as what TransCanada wanted to see in that process?
No, I think that was the best path forward to be able to review a pipeline project in the state. And it would do so.
You don't think that's what they wanted?
Do I think that...
You don't think that
1161?
What's in your bill is what TransCanada at heart wanted to see?
I think TransCanada wanted a process to follow in order to be able to apply to have the approval of the pipeline. And to that end, yes.
But that local quid pro quo would be just the beginning. As we'll show you, nationally, the Keystone debate would be defined from Washington with untraceable donations known as dark money.
Most powerful interests in the country have found ways to get around the laws and to do whatever the hell they want. I don't know how else to say it. That's rather direct, but it's true.
The story doesn't end here. Like the Fifth Estate's Facebook page so you can follow our investigations. We will post updates on stories and special video features that take you deep inside.
If the battle over Keystone is being fought on the ground in states like Nebraska, command and control come from the nation's capital. Not from the White House, but a few blocks away on K Street, where the two businesses that make the nation's capital tick come together, politics and lobbying. And if TransCanada is seen by some as the ugly Canadians in those flyover states, when CEO Russ Gillian comes to Washington, he fits right in with colleagues from Big Oil and their friends.
I mean, this is the oil and gas administration. Let's just be really direct here.
Investigative journalist Chuck Lewis specializes in the covert use of money, power, and lobbyists to affect public policy. In particular, with the untrackable donations known as dark money increasing in the U.S. each year.
There's been an explosion in terms of the amount of dark money. It's gone up from a few $100,000 to $1.4 billion just since 2012.
A case in point, the ubiquitous ad campaign south of the border soliciting support for TransCanada and the Keystone XL pipeline.
Let's build the Keystone XL.
The ads are sponsored by various associations, alliances, and institutes that sound as if they're public interest organizations, but are really run by special interest groups, fueled by that dark money with no record of where it comes from or where it goes, except that here it's for the benefit of TransCanada. So what does it all mean for the decision on the future of the Keystone XL pipeline? That brings us to this man.
We good? Hi, my name is Michael Watley. I'm the Executive Vice President for Consumer Energy Alliance.
As Michael Watley tells it on this Consumer Energy Alliance video, the CEA is a grassroots group representing hundreds of thousands of ordinary Americans, regular people, enthusiastically behind Keystone.
We've got about 275 affiliate members, about 450,000 individual members all across the country. We believe strongly that the pipeline will be good for American energy consumers.
You say the voice of the energy consumer. That's what you want CEA to be.
Well, that's what CEA is.
Yeah. But if you look at the list of supporters of CEA, it could equally be said it's the voice of big oil. Chevron, Exxon, Shell, BP, and on and on.
Yeah, and the Chamber of Commerce and trucking associations and manufacturers and small businesses all around the country, as well as steel producers and chemical manufacturers and hundreds of thousands of individuals.
Now, you might assume a national organization with 500,000 members in a big political fight would need offices and a staff. The CEA? Apparently not so much.
They're often operated out of a consulting firm or a mailbox. And you can tell that the money that is behind these groups is from a small subset of the population.
Robert McGuire is with the Center for Responsive Politics, investigating the flow of money to and from special interest groups like the Consumer Energy Alliance.
Essentially what they are is shell organizations. They are the industry or the wealthy donor fueling a group that is covered for their interests. It is, nothing more than that.
So how do we know if the CEA is one of those shell organizations? It describes itself as Grassroots, but it seems more like AstroTurf because it was founded by Michael Watley, a partner in HBW Consulting of Washington and a lobbyist for Keystone XL. He and the other founding partners of HBW are also top executives of the CEA, which pays them more than $1 million in fees.
You're an executive with both companies. David Holt has been involved with both companies. The addresses are the same for
absolutely
both companies.
Right. And that is fine. We have a master management contract where HBW does manage CEA.
Be that as it may, the key fact is this. As a tax-exempt nonprofit, the Consumer Energy Alliance must declare the total amount of donations it receives. But it's not required to publicly disclose who those donors are.
Money coming from whom? From where?
From our members. From our members. And we put our 990s on our website. We put our membership on our website. And we're very transparent where those resources come from.
But hold on a sec. The CEA website does list some members, but only a few hundred of 450,000. And for all the talk of transparency about tax returns, it releases no record of who gives how much to support worthy causes like TransCanada and Keystone XL. Anti-Keystone leader Jane Klebb says groups like the CEA and its ally, Nebraskans for Jobs and Energy Independence, give TransCanada both political support and political cover.
So they would start to blanket the airwaves with ads and with mailers and with robocalls, calling our side extremists, tree huggers, hypocrites. They essentially do the dirty work of TransCanada.
The Keystone Pipeline will create thousands of high-paying jobs.
Another of the CEA's roles in the Keystone campaign, to tout the number of jobs that would be created by construction of the pipeline.
We strongly support the Keystone XL pipeline. It has national importance. It will create and sustain 42,000 jobs across the country.
That sounds impressive, and it's a major Keystone selling point. But is it true?
You quoted the 42,000 figure that you said would be created and sustained. Sustained.
Yes. Right.
Which would lead one to believe would be permanent. No, created and sustained?
No, I don't think we've ever said that a construction job is going to be permanent.
According to a study done by the U.S. State Department, the number of permanent jobs created by the pipeline would not be 42,000, as Watley said. In fact, there would be just 35 permanent jobs, a discrepancy not lost on many Nebraskans.
So, with all due respect, sir, you're not a liar, but you sure are a BS.
And there's another thing. Remember Nebraskans for Jobs and Energy Independence, the local-sounding so-called grassroots group supporting the pipeline? Well, guess who one of the two principals of that is? Not a Nebraskan, but Michael Watley of the CEA, HBW, and K Street in Washington, D.C. TransCanada's then Executive Vice President Dennis McConaughey.
Environmental impacts.
Can you understand how there are some people who look at this process, Canadian company, coming to the U.S., using its money in one form or another to influence public policy in the state of Nebraska, and frown upon that?
I can understand there are some. I can understand there are some people who will take that view. I also understand that the net benefits economic to the state of Nebraska, I think a fair-minded assessment, outweigh those risks.
Important on others.
But for all the ads, the unrelenting lobbying, the seemingly endless amounts of money, it would turn out that what TransCanada and Keystone really needed was this guy.
That he's killed. He rejected the Keystone XL pipeline, despite the fact that it would have created 42,000 jobs.
Throughout the 2016 presidential campaign, the pipeline kept rearing its head. And once in the Oval Office, President Trump didn't disappoint.
All live television, fellas. Anybody afraid of live television? Okay, ready?
A lot had happened in between, but in the fight for Keystone, at long last, there seemed to be a winner.
TransCanada will finally be allowed to complete this long overdue project with efficiency and with speed.
The pipeline had not yet got the go-ahead in Nebraska, but Donald Trump couldn't resist teasing TransCanada CEO Russ Gillian in front of his big oil brethren for how much money the Canadians spent trying to infiltrate the Obama administration.
Russ, you've been waiting for a long, long time, and I hope you don't pay your consultants anything, because they had nothing to do with the approval. In fact, you should ask for the hundreds of millions of dollars back that you paid them, because they didn't do a damn thing except give you a no vote, right?
And President Trump would do another favor for TransCanada. Less than a month after his inauguration, he put an old friend of big oil in charge of the U.S. environment, choosing as the new head of the EPA a man from Oklahoma named Scott Pruitt.
Oh, I was shocked. I thought, this is just so far removed from reality. How can this happen?
There's always more to our stories. You can stay connected to the Fifth Estate on Twitter, get the latest on upcoming shows and special video features.
They're known as the Great Plains for a reason, extending from western Canada, where we call them the prairies, south through the American heartland along the planned Keystone XL pipeline route and into Oklahoma. And everywhere in Oklahoma you go, the scenery is interrupted only by evidence of its most important business, oil and gas. Though increasingly, the state is also known for something else.
Oklahoma was jolted by a 5.6 magnitude earthquake earlier today. Take a look at
This one happened early on a Saturday morning in September, a year ago.
Nearly a full minute of shaking in Oklahoma, a state now rivaling California as earthquake country.
It was recorded as the most powerful earthquake ever in the state, which is saying something, because the earthquake risk in Oklahoma is greater than anywhere else in the U.S. And this was a doozy.
What that is, that big burst of blue and green on the weather map, that's birds. That's all the birds in Oklahoma taking off and flying away all at once.
The quake that terrorized all those birds measured 5.8 on the Richter scale, a growing threat in a state with so much subterranean activity, both seismic and oil and gas related.
With all these earthquakes and all the issues, the Keystone Pipeline endangers any place that it passes.
Veteran Oklahoma lawyer Garvin Isaac is a longtime watchdog of the state's oil and gas industry. He warns that earthquakes and pipelines are a lethal combination.
And if the Keystone Pipeline comes through here, we're going to be in more danger than we could be without it.
Indeed, Oklahoma earthquakes have increased exponentially. In 2007, the state had just one earthquake over 3.0. In the past 3 years, the average is 700 3.0 quakes annually. Experts say much of the problem is man-made. Those quakes, the result of water violently injected underground as part of the natural gas fracking process. Investigating, regulating, possibly even prosecuting the earthquake problem would fall to Oklahoma's chief law enforcement official, the state attorney general at the time, Scott Pruitt.
What should be the job of an attorney general?
The attorney general is sworn to uphold the laws of the state of Oklahoma and to apply the laws fairly and equally.
And you don't believe Scott Pruitt, as attorney general at least, did that?
No, he did not. And it was all, let me focus on what the oil and gas industry wants, and we're going to do it.
I think that the oil and gas companies in Oklahoma saw an opportunity to have their concerns go directly to an attorney general whose sort of ideological position on small government and the promotion of business through tax cuts and other types of favorable treatment really aligned in a way that I think worked out very well for oil and gas companies in Oklahoma.
Kristen van de Biesenbos is an energy lawyer now at the University of Calgary. But she watched Scott Pruitt up close when she taught at the University of Oklahoma. She says, though welcomed by big oil, his election was a disaster for protectors of the environment, like the EPA.
He was known as somebody who would not cooperate with the EPA because he did not believe that the EPA should play a role in state regulation of environmental issues. He believed that should be state jurisdiction only.
In fact, when he became Attorney General, Scott Pruitt disbanded the state's Environmental Protection Agency altogether. And when the federal EPA began investigating the impact of fracking in Oklahoma, Pruitt sent an official demand that they cease and desist, putting the needs of oil and gas ahead of the environment. And he wasn't done yet.
Pruitt sued the Environmental Protection Agency 14 times during the time he was the Oklahoma Attorney General. So our whole government in Oklahoma is now one that's controlled by oil and gas.
So consider Scott Pruitt's involvement with TransCanada and the Keystone XL pipeline. Two of Keystone's biggest boosters in Oklahoma are the state's big oil companies, whose products would use the pipeline: Continental Resources and Devon Energy, both backers of Scott Pruitt's election campaign. An investigation by the New York Times revealed what it called a secret alliance between Pruitt and those oil and gas companies, which sent directions to the Oklahoma Attorney General as to what he should do and say to federal officials about matters that might adversely affect big oil. Those industry letters were copied virtually verbatim onto Scott Pruitt's letterhead, then sent to government agencies in Washington.
That's right.
To the EPA, the Bureau of Land Management, to the White House, to Barack Obama?
Yeah.
And the Fifth Estate obtained a copy of this legal brief written by Scott Pruitt's office, supporting TransCanada's lawsuit against the Obama administration for its handling of the Keystone approval process. And then there's this, a memo from TransCanada forwarded to Pruitt, providing the Attorney General with talking points for a public hearing about Keystone, to just read at the time you were called on to testify, as the memo puts it. Pruitt apparently covered many of TransCanada's points in his testimony.
I couldn't believe it. I thought this is the most embarrassing thing that could happen, is to have an elected attorney general to be getting drafts of letters telling him what to do and how to do it.
But did anyone tell Attorney General Pruitt what to do about the potentially disastrous problem involving all those Oklahoma earthquakes, especially when the Keystone XL pipeline would be built at a place that calls itself the pipeline crossroads of the world?
It's the world's largest oil storage facility in Cushing, Oklahoma, holding enough to make gasoline that would fill up half of all the automobiles in the United States. And if the Keystone pipeline goes ahead as planned, it'll reach from Alberta right through here, all the way to the Gulf of Mexico.
Earthquake!
Okay, now we're feeling this one.
You can understand the nerves, especially in Cushing, where there are already 50 million barrels of oil in storage underground. Add the Keystone XL pipeline with another 800,000 barrels of oil a day, and critics say an earthquake here could be catastrophic.
What's going to happen when we have an earthquake that's a 6 on the Richter scale? That'll be the worst environmental disaster in the history of the United States.
But apparently none of it diminished Scott Pruitt's stock in the eyes of the new president. Just the opposite.
Yes or no? Does the president believe that climate change is real and a threat to the United States?
You know what's interesting about all the discussions we had through the last several weeks have been focused on one singular issue. Is Paris good or not for this country?
When Trump named Pruitt to head the EPA, U.S. official responsible for defending American air, land, and water, to many it was inexplicable.
Oh, I was shocked. I thought, this is just so far removed from reality. How can this happen?
But Big Oil and Pruitt gadfly, lawyer Garvin Isaac, says he understands why that choice might make perfect Trumpian sense.
Donald Trump wanted him in there because he knew he was going to protect the big money, the oil and gas.
So now TransCanada and Keystone have another powerful ally in Washington. But as you will see, there are questions about the tactics employed to push through the pipeline, payoffs, clamping down on protest, quiet arrangements with law enforcement.
I've gotten death threats. We've been followed. I have random people sometimes coming up to me, calling me by name, and I have no idea who they are.
Justin's rifle, bird, let's catch can, or we put a flank on this cat.
The American frontier spirit is alive and well in South Dakota, and few people represent that better than Troy Heinert. Though he wears a black hat, Heinert's one of the good guys, a pickup rider on the professional rodeo circuit, whom the other cowboys depend on. He is also a member of the Sioux Nation, as well as a South Dakota state senator, opposed to the Keystone XL pipeline from the beginning.
The original route cut through the heart of our reservation, and we were against it immediately.
Most of all, he says he can't ignore what he considers TransCanada's disregard for the opposition of Indigenous groups to the pipeline.
The frustrating part of that is when you have that many people saying, we don't want this in our land, and they just turn a blind eye.
What haunts those on both sides is the specter of the violent demonstrations last year against an American company's pipeline in North Dakota. Ugly images of force against Native protesters, pepper spray, tear gas, rubber bullets used by law enforcement and the National Guard. Next door in South Dakota, it was a wake-up call. Not long after Donald Trump signed his executive order, South Dakota legislators approved an emergency law, Bill 176, to severely limit the right to protest. The bill passed, but Senator Troy Heinert voted against what he saw as a giveaway to Big Oil.
It was terrible, absolutely terrible.
Do you believe that TransCanada may have had a role in that?
Possibly, I don't know for sure. It's darn sure in their favor. And when they set up laws or regulations to limit access to free speech and right to protest, I have a serious issue with that.
And so does Louis Grassroots, a member of the Sioux tribe in Lower Brule, South Dakota. He participated in the protests in North Dakota and says he and other Lower Brule Sioux were shocked to hear their tribe accused of supporting Keystone XL, which most of the state's Sioux community did not.
Our tribe was actually working with TransCanada, and they were in cahoots with them at the time.
In cahoots, he says, because Lower Brule leaders had talked with TransCanada about running an electricity line across tribal land to power the future Keystone XL pipeline on its route through South Dakota. But those leaders apparently kept the dealings with TransCanada a secret, even from some of their own members.
It's a situation that once money is put in front of somebody, and we're having a financial crisis here within the tribe, they'll sell out.
Grassroots may be cynical about his tribal council's track record, but TransCanada's man in South Dakota maintains all his negotiations to get the tribe to support Keystone were above board.
There was no secretive deals. As far as tribal relations goes, there was no secretive deals.
ever.
Lou Thompson was head of the company's tribal relations unit. His job, to overcome the doubts the Lower Brule Sioux had about making a deal with TransCanada despite the opposition of the other tribes.
How can we be involved with this project at the same time that the public sentiment of this project is so toxic that from a political standpoint, our council cannot endorse the project or even working with the company because it would essentially be political suicide. Right. How do you manage those two? And I think the tribe really was hopeful that the company would come to their aid and help them figure that out.
It definitely was a challenge for TransCanada. They needed access to tribal land, but unlike private property, they couldn't go to court to expropriate it. So Lou Thompson set out to win Lower Brule approval by what he calls tribal engagement. In other words, finding projects for which he could spend TransCanada's money to build a relationship with them.
It's contributing to the powwow. It's helping renovate the powwow grounds. It's providing money to elders committees so that they can go to sponsored events. So we did, as TransCanada did, provided, I don't know what the actual number would be. It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, let's put it that way.
Hundreds of thousands from TransCanada that the Lower Brule Tribal Council chose not to tell their membership about, according to Louis Grassroots.
It went wholeheartedly without the knowledge of the people. And that was a truly disheartening act against our own people, because a lot of us have no idea what these councils are doing.
Now under new leadership, the Lower Brule Sioux apparently have returned some of the tribal engagement money spent by TransCanada. But it all remains a divisive issue, and the tribe's new chairman wouldn't speak to us about it on camera. The fight over Keystone has left everyone on edge, looking over their shoulder. And more so, since back in Nebraska, the leader of the anti-Keystone movement there, Jane Klebb, says she has proof there has been quiet cooperation between U.S. law enforcement and TransCanada itself. Her group, Bold Nebraska, received a tip that the pipeline company initiated what were called training sessions with the FBI and state police. The Fifth Estate has obtained a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, which TransCanada used to identify what they saw as potential threats to Keystone, depicting people like Klebb and her members as aggressive and abusive.
So how would this work? TransCanada somehow contacts the FBI?
Yes.
And says...
We think that there are some credible threats to our business and to the safety of Nebraskans, and we would like to come in and do a training with you to the Nebraska State Patrol. That's exactly what happened.
And it's also clear TransCanada held similar sessions with the FBI and police in 2 other Keystone states, Oklahoma and Texas.
We had heard
when Bold Nebraska asked to know what allegations had been made against them, the state refused.
And the Attorney General told us that we couldn't see that it was privileged information, but the State Patrol actually gave us the PowerPoint presentation. And it showed images of activists and painted us as if we were like these extremists, and then went through very specific detail about how to use terrorism laws against citizens who are protesting pipelines.
We wanted to ask TransCanada about that and more, but the company refused all our requests to discuss pipeline security or anything else. As for pro-pipeline lobbyist Michael Watley, he insists with all that's at stake, precautions to identify threats are perfectly reasonable.
This is a matter of public safety. This is really a matter of public safety. I mean, when you're talking about pipelines of this magnitude, if you have groups that sabotage the pipeline, you cause a major explosion, or on an oil pipeline that you would cause a major catastrophic spill.
After 10 years of rhetoric, lobbying, and protest, it now all comes down to the pending decision of the state government of Nebraska. A yes from those in this hearing room and Keystone XL can go ahead. A no. And despite Donald Trump's approval, it's over. That is, if the case doesn't go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which many believe it will. However, for former TransCanada executive Dennis McConaughey, as presumably for the pipeline company itself, the role of Donald Trump is now seen as little less than miraculous.
Something happened that rarely happens in life, and that is a second chance. And that the world got reinvented the night that he was going to be president because Canada was going to get a second chance at XL.
For South Dakota Senator Troy Heinert and other Keystone opponents, it's a final chance to stop the pipeline. And after the violence in North Dakota, they're bracing for the end game here.
What do you think will happen here?
I'm worried. I am worried about what could happen here because I know the level of commitment that the protesters have. And obviously, a huge corporation with lots of investors, they're going to be just as committed. And, you know, that's dangerous. That can be dangerous.
After what has been a long and bitter fight, with passions still rising, Jane Klebb says, as others on both sides, she has no choice now but to fear the worst and hope for the best.
And at a cost to you personally?
You know, I mean, I obviously don't see my children, right, as much as other moms and dads who kind of have 9-to-5 jobs. And my kids know that. And my kids know that their mom gets death threats. But they also know that I'm standing up for something that is deeply right. Sometimes you think this stuff only happens in the movies, right? That you have this big corporation coming in and trying to kind of take over the little guy. And in Nebraska with TransCanada, that's what we've seen up close and personal. They are a big corporation. They came in and acted like bullies. And we've beat them, you know, this little team of folks has beat them so far. The question is, will we be able to beat them in the end?